Scoot around here. Okay. Okay. Cool. So, where did we leave off yesterday? We set up the back end. We not only set up the back end, we set up our back end and got it connected to SQL to Postgres, and we did that through SQLize. Okay, so what do we need to do today? What's the next step?
Oh, we were working on models. Oh, sorry. Yeah. We were working on models.
So we have the models defined from yesterday, which is our users table. And we checked in P-SQL and we saw that those tables showed up. So what's the next step? Front end. So we used Create React App, but we didn't do anything with it yet, right? So let's dive into Create React App. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to work on getting where I was yesterday back up and running. Yes.
Before you do that, can you just quickly show me how you connected P-SQL to what we already have?
Sure.
I think I missed that.
Sure. Oh.
Taking your notes. Something's still not there. Oh.
You should be up now. Okay. So I'm going to open up my VS Code. And I'm going to go to the folder that I was working in yesterday. Oh, I have to share my screen. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to open my off-day project, whatever we created yesterday. And conveniently, the file open is models.js. And our models.js, I will blow this up, has the database name and the username getting passed in there. So if we go open up a new terminal and fire up our backend, so I'm going to cd into my backend folder, and I'm going to run node mod. Can I steal some of your table space? Thank you, guys. Okay. Okay, so we turned it on and we immediately get an error, and it says SQLize connection, connect econ refuse, right? So error messages can be your friends, right? It isn't just why is this broken, it's what is the error message telling me? And so what that error message is telling me is that there is literally a connection issue to 127.0.0.15432. Okay, well, where is 127.0.0.1 in our code? Oh, that's in our SQLize code. So there must be some issue with getting Postgres connected to SQLize. So I'm going to open up the Postgres app, and I very clearly see it's not running. So SQLize is trying, our backend is trying to connect to the database, and it's not up and running. So all I have to do is hit start. And we still have this error because we haven't told the server to try and reconnect yet. So I'm going to hit Control-C to cancel that. And then I'm going to rerun our nodemon command, and we see our SQL commands run. And we know we're connected into the database. Okay, all of that's great, but we still don't have our front end running. We have our back end's talking to the database, all of that's fantastic. Now we need to go into React land. So I'm going to open up a new terminal here, and we can just switch in between the two of them. So if we open up P-SQL, I have a second connection over here that is pointing at localhost. We can change this to 127.0.0.1 if we wanted to. 9 times out of 10, localhost and 127.0.0.1 point to the same place. Would this be better in the conference room? Probably.
Yeah.
That's fine. We will make a move.
All right.
All right, so Karen asked a great question of what if I want multiple databases? I'm working on a lot of different projects and my users table for one database might be different for another, right? Or I don't want my users of one project to be shared with the users of another project. So while P-SQL is a great stepping stone to kind of get quick looks into your database, it's not great for manipulating your database or doing some fancier things like setting up associations and getting into more advanced database techniques. So for using that, and I will post a link for this, there is a piece of software called PG Admin. It is a free web interface for managing your database, and you can get all kinds of cool stats on it, really get into advanced things here. Feel free to download it, and it installs just like any other application would. I'm going to open it up because I do have it installed already. PG Admin.
So you use PG Admin in conjunction with
you can use it in place of P-SQL. I thought I had installed it. Maybe I had not. P-SQL is much easier to use, and if you want to just quickly look at what's in your database, I would go to P-SQL. PG Admin is going to be more into the nitty-gritty of things. You could also use the terminal if you wanted to create new databases and assign users to them. PG Admin is just another UI tool that you can use instead of writing commands right in the terminal. So while that is taking its sweet time to open, what we're going to do is we're going to open up a new connection, and we're just going to use the basic information that's in here. Okay, that green line is going to drive me crazy. Wonder if I disconnect and reconnect. Okay, there we go. So I can connect to my database here, and we see we have our users table. And if we go to structure, we can see that the structure in here matches the structure in our Visual Studio Code of our user table, right? So we have ID, username, password, salt. And if we look in our P-SQL, we also have username, password, and salt.
So when you opened up P-SQL, you were one of those tabs and you just typed in the 127.0.0.1.
Correct. It looks like this localhost.
Oh, okay.
And exactly. So now that I have P-SQL or PG Admin installed, the first time you install this, it will ask you for a master password. I'm just going to go ahead and type mine in. And over on the left here, we have servers, and we see localhost and databases. And I have two databases here, right? So if I wanted to make a new database for my capstone or for this admin, this auth project, or I can right click on databases and go to create and say I want a new database. And it's going to say, okay, what do you want to call your database? So we'll just call that auth, and we'll use the owner, my user account that we already have. So I can hit save on that. And then I can go back to P-SQL if I wanted to and change my database over to auth. And when I connect to that, it connected, but there's no tables over here. Well, why are there no tables? Because we haven't told Sequelize to go use that new database. So I can go into my VS Code, and I'm going to change this first one here, which is the database name, to auth. And I can save that. And I want to make sure my server is still running, which it is. So when we go to P-SQL and hit refresh down here, we have our users table that popped in. Right, so again, this is if you wanted to create multiple databases, which is a good idea. We only have one server running. We have multiple databases in that one Postgres server, but it's just that one Postgres server that's running, and we are still relying on the Postgres app to have that server up and running and accessible to us. So if we look in the Postgres app, we can see the auth database we created and the one with the username that was the default. And again, we can manage all of that through PG admin if we wanted to, or we can take a look at the data either in PG admin or pSQL. So this is all personal preference of where you want to go, and eventually you get into a flow. I can't tell you how many times a day I go, all right, I'm trying to do CRUD operations, right? I'm trying to create something. I don't know what step it's going wrong. So I do my fetch request, and then I put a console log in my back end, and it doesn't console log out. I go, oh, okay, I know there's a problem between the front end and the back end talking. Or it might console log that out. So I go, okay, is it getting to the database? So instead of writing some more code in my back end, I go to pSQL and I see if that data is getting imported. And I look at that data and the new row shows up, but maybe not some of the data in that row, right? So it's all about debugging and figuring out the individual pieces and where it goes wrong. Okay, so quick little database aside there. We'll continue to use the auth database, that's fine. I'm just gonna close all of these out. They're still running up in my menu bar. You notice I have two elephants up here. That is both PG admin and the pSQL app. So we have our backend fired up. We're using Node-RON. What we need to do now is get our React fired up. So I'm gonna go into the second VSH shell here. It might have a different name on yours, that's fine. It might say bash. And what we are going to do is we're going to CD into our front end, and then we are going to npm start, right? And that is different than our back end, which we're using Node-RON to run. In our front end, we can use npm start because Create React app got all that set up for us. So we're going to npm start, and it's going to open up a new window for us. And eventually, okay, we have this edit app.js. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to nuke all of this out so we have just a white page. And then what's the next step?
Going back and editing the files. Oh.
Yeah, so once we edit this file and get that cleared out, what do we want to do? We have our front end running, we have our back end running. We have the back end connected to the database.
Do the fetch commands?
Yeah, we got to do the fetch. We got to get the front end talking to the back end. So let's go into our VS Code. I'm going to close my back end folder for now. And I'm going to close any of the back end windows I have open. It's very easy to get lost between the two of them. And what I'm going to do is open up the SRC folder, and I'm going to look at app.js, and I'm just going to start deleting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete out logo. I'm going to delete out my app.css. I'm going to delete out all of this lovely stuff and replace it with just a div with an h1 of, can anyone guess?
Hello world.
Okay, while I'm in here, I'm going to delete some more files just because we don't need them. So I'm going to delete out index.css. I'm going to delete out my app.css. I'm going to delete out test, even though it would be great to use test cases. We won't for this demo. We're going to delete out logo. Service worker we will leave, and index.js we will leave. So what index.js is doing is linking the HTML to the React code. So what we have in here is we have our app. Well, what do we know? How do we know what app is? We're importing app from /app. Okay, well, if we look in our app.js, we have our app here, and we also have an export default app. So in our app, we're saying, hey, other files can import this. And then in our index.js, we're importing it, and then we're using it right here. So React needs to know one final thing to make all of this work. It goes, when does the React code attach to the HTML code? And that's why we use document.getElementById here, and we look for root. Okay, well, where's root? If we open up the public folder here and look in index.html, we have some HTML here, we have a theme, and all the way down here, we have our div ID root. So what we're doing with that, with this React DOM.render app is we're essentially injecting our React code into the HTML code. So I'm going to delete out my import index.css here because I'm realizing I have an error in my console that's saying it's looking for index.css and it can't find it because we deleted that. So we're going to save that. We get back to our terminal with no errors. And if we go, we have our hello world. Okay. While I'm here, is anyone opposed to me using React Strap?
Can you just?
No, I would like that.
Just use Bootstrap?
Yeah,
So why? Why do you want to do that?
there's just not a lot of resource in React Strap, like all documentation.
I thought it took it.
So anything that you can use in in Bootstrap as a class, you can also use in React Strap. So
That's why I've been stuck with trying to use both Bootstrap and React Strap.
yeah, so if we look at React Strap, let's say we want to use a container, right? In regular Bootstrap, we would say div class equals container. Well, in React Strap, we import the container first, and then we use the container component instead of a div class name container. We use just the container tag. We'll go over it and I'll go through it step by step. It's one of those things that seems complicated, and then there's something that clicks and you go, oh, this is simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my VS Code, and I stop the server, Control-C, and I'm going to npm install -- save, and I'm going to install React Strap. Okay, while that's installing, I'm going to go back to my app.jsx.
Okay, wait, just 1 second. Are
Yeah.
you in the front end? Yes.
I'm in front end,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Is anyone stuck?
I mean, I'm the PG my admin, like, which version should I?
Whatever the latest is.
Okay.
Go to Mac OS, and then the top one, and then the middle one. Okay, so we are going to, while React Strap is still installing my terminal, the first thing we need to do is import it. So we're going to import a couple things. We're going to import a container, we're going to import a row, and we're going to import a column. And where are we going to import them from? We're going to import them from React Strap. Okay, now in our code, instead of using a div here, I want to use that container. Now, in non-React land, I would write div class name equals container. Well, really, I would write class on class name, but because it's React. And then I would close off my div. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment out these lines to show you that you can use those class names directly. So once it installs everything, I'm going to fire my server back up with npm start. And it's refreshing, and it's refreshing, and this didn't change. That didn't work, okay? So any guesses of what we need to do? Exactly. So we are going to go back to our terminal, and we are going to npm install -- save or -s Bootstrap.
And you need Bootstrap with React Strap just because it has more stuff.
React Strap relies on Bootstrap. And what that allows it to do is it allows the Bootstrap team and all the open source contributors to update Bootstrap without you having to also update React Strap. So if they add some new component, you could use that directly in your code if you updated Bootstrap without having to wait for the React Strap team to update their code. Okay, so we are going to npm start again, and we're going to go to our code, and nothing. One more thing we need to do. We have to import it. I would be very impressed if anyone had the import memorized off the top of their head. So I'm going to go down here. What?
I think I know.
You want to try it?
Yeah, I was typing it before
Go for it.
import, and then bootstrap / this / that's all I got.
It's okay. So we should have, they have it pretty well documented right on the React Strap page. So we're gonna paste that in there. It's gonna compile. It's giving me some errors that I imported things that I'm not using. We can ignore that for now because we are eventually going to use them. And now we have our hello world. It's nicely formatted, and we have that indentation there, right? So, yep.
Which one did you install from the React page? Import. Oh, it was that. Oh, cool.
Okay, so what we have here is our div class name container. Now we can use Bootstrap like we would in regular HTML, but we can also use it in importing the container and then using that instead. Right, so this container to me is a little bit easier to read, right? I don't have a div, I'm not getting lost in it. I'm just using that container. And if I don't know where the container is coming from, I can scroll up and go, oh, importing container from React Strap. Now I know where it's coming from. When you just use a div class name, you go container, well, I could have defined my own container. That might be coming from Bootstrap. That might be coming from somewhere else. So that's what allows us to use the container right in there. So if I go back to my code, you notice it doesn't change at all because it's just an alternative. Okay, so our login page has to do a couple things. What does it need to do?
Username and a password.
Yep, but before we can sign in, we need the ability to create an account. So let's do that. This front end is only going to be as a demo, right? This isn't going to be like, oh, let's drop this in and use it in the capstone. This front end is just, the alternative to building this front end is we could use Postman or any other get post client, right? And we could do it all in the back end. But I thought doing it in React would give you a good experience with using React itself, and then also seeing what's involved with making a UI for creating accounts and signing in and all of that stuff. Okay, so I'm going to delete out my hello world, and I'm just going to put in an H3 tag that says create account. And I'm going to put that in a row. No, we'll get to making it pretty later. Okay, so I need a form. So I'm going to do a form, and the class name on that, I'm blanking. So I'm going to go to the Bootstrap documentation and go to documentation and do a search for forms. And we have our form, which does not require any classes, and then we have form groups for each of the inputs. So what I'm going to do is just split my screen so I can see both, hopefully. Okay, so we are going to do our form tag, and we are going to check to see if React Strap has a form group, which they do, right? So VS Code's helping us out here. There's no reason to fight it. If React Strap didn't have a form group, we could use the class name just like we would here, but I want to use React Strap as much as possible just because it's easier code to read. So I'm going to import my form group, And then in here, I'm going to use my form group, and I'm going to do a label, and the label is for an email. We did username in our backend, right? So we'll match that here. We'll do a label for username, and I am going to make that label not capitalized, weird. I'm going to say username and close off my label tag. And then I also need a input. So I'm going to say input, and the type is going to be text. And we will close that off. And that input needs to be a form control. So let me see if, so React Trap, I'm looking for form control because that's a class that we want to put on the input to make Bootstrap make it look pretty. And React Trap does not have that. So what I can do is in my input, I can still use a class. I just have to say class name, and that's going to be form-control. Okay, so before we get too far, let's look in our front end, and we have our username and our form field. Okay, so I'm just gonna clean that up. I'll do a capital U, I'll put a colon on it. Now we need to repeat that. So we're just gonna copy and paste and change username to password. And then instead of type text, we're gonna get fancy and we're going to say type password, because I know you guys are all dying to see what my password is. And when we create accounts, it's also a good idea to confirm the password. And I'm just going to make sure my fours match here. The point of the for, let me save that, is so that if I click on username, it should put the cursor right in my text input. It also makes it more accessible for screen readers. So I'm going to just add quick IDs here, one for my username, one for my password. And the final one for confirm password. Okay, and save all of those. Come back over here, and when I click on password, you notice it puts me right in that text field. This is my password manager, so just ignore that popping up. I don't know if I can turn that off. And if I click on confirm password, it's not working. I want that input there, so let me check that. My label is for confirm password. My ID is for confirm dash password. So case matters. And I'm gonna come back over here, and now I can click on any of the fields. Now, if I type in a password, ABC, you notice it shows up as dots, but if I type in my username, we can see it. And again, the reason for that is we use input type password here. Okay, great. We need one more thing in our UI, and that is a button. So I could use div class button if I wanted to, or I can come up here and import a button from React Trap. And then down here, I can create a new button that says create account, and save it, and we have our button. And I believe we can add primary here, and that should not work. So we are going to go into the React Trap documentation, and we're gonna go to components, we're gonna go to buttons, and we have, instead of just adding primary, they tell us use color primary. But I think green is nice for creating an account. So I'm going to use success instead. So I'm going to change this primary to color equals success. And now when we look at our front end, we have our green button. Okay, now the reason why I'm pushing React Trap so much here is because I can read this code and know what success is. Success is the color. Right, but if you were using Bootstrap straight up, you would do btn space btn dash success. Now that could be changing the size of the button, that could be changing the color of it, that could be changing maybe even the text inside that button. But the nice thing about JSX is it's verbose, right? The nice thing about React. So I can say color equals success, and I know that that is changing the color. So we have all of that in there. Now what? Yep, so we need to do a fetch. So I'm going to change this function app because we're going to do a little bit more. Yeah.
I'm still stuck on here because
You have to start the Postgres app, which you have running. Okay, so let's go back to your PG admin or your, yeah. And go to right click on that, create server, and the name is going to be your username. And your connection up at the top is going to be localhost or 127.0.0.1. And your username is also going to be your Mac username. You can leave all those the same. And then if you hit save, you are now connected in, and you could right click on databases and create a new database. Okay, so we have this all here. I'm going to change this a little bit, a function. Joey will go into this a little bit more next week on what is a stateless component and how you can have components that just return code. But we're gonna get a little bit fancier. And we're going to turn this into a full class-based component. So instead of function app, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say export default. And we're just saying that this is the thing that if you import this file, this is the default thing that's going to come out. We are going to export default class, and we're going to call it app. And then we also need to tell it that, hey, we're using React in here. We're getting fancy. This is a component. So we're going to say extends component, and we're going to do curly braces. And we're going to take out this line at the bottom because we're already exporting the default. We're doing a lot up here, right? We're exporting it, we're giving it a name, and we're telling it, hey, this is going to be a React component. How does it know it's a component? Because we imported it. Where did we import it? We imported it from React. Okay. So now the component's like, all right, what do you want to do in this component? We want to render something. What do we want to render? Well, we want to render all of this stuff. Okay, so down here, I'm just going to close off my curly braces so they match with the curly braces I created up here. And we are going to pray that I did that right from memory. Okay, so we're still running, we're good. And just to really confirm it, we'll say create account with an exclamation point, and it changed. So the reason why I did that is because I want to use some more React-y things in this code. And the first React-y thing that I'm going to do is use something called component did mount. And what that is going to do is basically it's going to say, hey, when the render function is called for the first time, I want to run some code. And we can interact with the component, we can get rid of it, we can do whatever we want, but that component did mount is only going to run once. So I'm going to do this console.log hello, and over here, how do we get to our console? Of course, we go to inspect console, and we can, HTML is cranky. It says we shouldn't be using for. It wants us to use HTML4 because that's the React version of it. So I'm just gonna quickly change those out so that error goes away. Okay, so we have our console log hello. Chrome is trying to help us out and have us build better UX. So they're also saying that in addition to using type password, we should also have it add in a autocomplete, so our password manager will be able to fill in those form fields better. But what I'm looking at here, this is in yellow. So this isn't something that I'm doing wrong. This is something that's just saying, hey, you can build a better app here. So we don't really have to worry about anything in yellow. So what I'm looking at is we have our hello and that printed out. Great. So now we know that that code is at least running. All right. Now, what's magic of React? React is still JavaScript. So we can write our fetch like we wrote our fetch when we used jQuery, or when we wrote just vanilla JS, or when we were in the HTTP module back with Ryan. Fetch is fetch. Fetch is going to work wherever it works without React. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to do a fetch. What do I want to fetch? Yep. So I need to point it at my server. So I'm going to say HTTP 127.0.0.1, and I want to fetch. We're gonna just say test. Okay, and it wants to know some more options, right? So we need to tell it that the method we're going to use. Let's say we're going to do a post to that. Okay. And this is just a test. We're not sending any fancy data here. We just want to make sure our front end is talking to the back end. So we also need to tell it that, hey, we're going to send up some headers. And what we're going to do is we are going to send up the content type, and we're going to tell you that we are sending up application JSON. Right, so in order for Express to know that we're sending up JSON, we need to tell it that so body parser can do its magic and give us access to rec.body. Okay, we also want to send it up some data. So we're going to say body, and we are going to json.stringify. And what are we going to stringify? Hello, world. Okay. And then we are going to do something. We're going to get some data back, but that data is going to come back as raw JSON. So what are we going to do? We are going to return the raw JSON.json. So we're going to parse out the JSON so we can actually use it. It's not going to come back just as a string. And then we're going to get the data now that we can use it and just console log out data. Okay, so we did a lot there. And if we jump over to our server, we haven't attached any form fields. We're not sending up anything in particular. But if I refresh our server here, it says access to fetch from origin localhost 3000 has been blocked by cores. So let's go fix that. So we are going to go to our backend now and open up our index.js in our backend. And we are going to look here and say WTF, because we should be using cores. So this is totally planned. We're going to go to the cores documentation with Express, because knowing where to find things is important. And we are going to var cores, which we did with our const cores, require cores, and then app.use cores. We're sitting on 5,000. Oh, I know what our problem is. Notice we're running on localhost here. For the computer, remember me saying 9 times out of 10, 127.0.0.1 and localhost are the same thing? They're pointing to the same thing, but the front end is going, I'm running on localhost, so I'm only going to let things through that are on localhost. And we made a request to the server that was on another port, but that we made the request to 127.0.0.1. So it's going, nope, localhost 127, different things. We're not going to let that through. So if I go back to my front end code and change this to localhost, and the other thing that I missed here is the port. It needs to know where our Express server is running on localhost. So I'm going to put in 5,000 there, and we get a different error. We always celebrate different errors. Okay, now we have host to localhost 5,000. I'm on 3,000 for my front end, but my Express server is running on 5,000.
Okay.
So it's saying, hey, 404 not found test. Well, what do you mean? I have my, oh, I don't have a test endpoint written yet. So I'm going to app.post, because that's what we did in the front end, to test. And we are going to grab our rec res, as always, and all we're going to do is console.log rec.body.hello. And we're going to see if we can see world in our backend terminal. But if we're doing an endpoint, we always have to res.send something back. The front end needs to know that the server got it and it can continue. So we are going to res.send, and we are going to send back world as hello. Why not? Okay, so we're going to save here, and we are going to switch to our backend terminal. And we have some SQL here, but when I refresh this page, we get no errors. Good, so let's look in our console down here. We have world that printed out. So that now we know, hey, when we send up hello world, the backend was able to receive that. It parsed the JSON out. Everything worked great. Okay, now do we know the data got back to the server? What did we send back? We sent back our world hello. And what did we do with that? Well, we sent it back and it came back as raw JSON. It came back as a string. We told it to parse out that JSON as an object that we can use and then console log it out. So if we look in our console log, we have our world hello. And just to prove that the JSON parse worked, we can do data.world, and what we'll console log out is hello. Okay, so got our front end created pretty quickly. We still have to do a login page. We can still make it prettier, but we have a basic form created, and we also have our front end and back end now talking to each other. So it's 8:20. I'm going to stop now and let everyone catch up to where I'm at. Now, tomorrow, we're going 100% on off. We're going to go through not only what happens when we hit create account, but we're going to go through all the back-end magic of how do we create a hash? How do we do that salting thing that they were talking about? Last night, I learned the difference between salting and peppering. Yes. Salting is when you store the salt information with the password. Peppering is when you do the salt, you generate a random string, but instead of storing it with the password, you store it in another data source, so you make it more secure. Peppering is not very popular, and I would doubt if anyone asked you that on an interview question. However, it was like a little fun fact for me. I was like, oh, I learned what peppering is. So we're gonna do, we're gonna start out with just creating the user in the database and storing our password in plain text. Then you're gonna get yelled at by me because I'm writing the code. And we're going to secure it with a hash. And then you're gonna get yelled at by me again, and we're going to store it with a salt. And then you're gonna get yelled at me again because we're using an insecure algorithm. So we're gonna use a more secure algorithm. And then we're going to implement all of that in the front end. So we're gonna have a login, we're gonna go through testing that, but we're gonna go through several iterations of creating an account. And the reason for me doing that is so when you go into someone else's code base, you can shriek when you see that they're storing passwords in plain text, or you can look at their database format and go, where's the salt? I need the salt. And everyone will think you're crazy. But My game plan is by Thursday, we can look at what they call a pre-roll solution. So we can look at how we use Firebase and how we can drop that in and still make our front end and back end secure. But tomorrow we are just going to iterate over and over and over again on how we can make the most basic auth system and then how we can layer security on top of that.
So we're not going over Firebase tomorrow, it's just
If we fly through all the other stuff, we will jump into Firebase. The thing with auth is it's very easy to get it working and not understand it, right? And so when we start layering in salt, you can run your code and it can be working, but I really want to make sure that you guys are understanding why we use the salt or how we generate the salt or how the salt gets added into the hash and what a hash is and all of those kinds of things. We're not going to be writing, we're going to probably be writing 20 or 30 lines of code to make all of this work. So what's really important tomorrow is just getting those concepts down, which is definitely a shift, right? It's when you're only focused on getting the code running, it's hard to get those concepts, and a lot of those concepts are behind the scenes, which is why I want to layer them on. And instead of just jumping to the final solution and going, this is how you should do it, we will definitely get to that point. But there are, I would not be surprised if in an interview you got a question like, how do you store passwords securely? Right? And they're looking for buzzwords. They're looking for encryption. They're looking for hashing. They're looking for salting. But if you jump to a pre-built solution like Passport or Firebase, that's kind of managed for you. And if you told the interviewer, oh, I would use something like Login with Google or Firebase or whatever, the interviewer is going to go, okay, that's fine, but we have our own auth system. How would you make that more secure? And so that's what the intent is tomorrow. And then hopefully on Thursday, we'll have time to go, and this is how you implement a drop-in solution.
Okay.
Cool.
Cool.
I'm going to end the stream and then help anyone catch up that needs it.